How did you gravitate towards technology?
In those days, there was no cell phone, no internet, and the only thing that you had access to was books.
Sir, how did the return to India happen?
This is one way of my runa, right? Basically, my debt to, because there's a famous quote in India also. 1/4 you learn from the guru, 1/4 you learn from your students, 1/4 by your own effort, and 1/4 by time. Okay, so one senses that one could do something for the country also.
You mentioned some of the biggest names of industry and research that time.
Professor John McCarthy, the person who coined the term artificial intelligence. So I also worked with Hennessey, who founded the MIPS computer systems that we discussed before. So from that point of view, I would advise students to...
Hello everyone, my name is Siddharth Maheshwari and I am the co-founder of Newton School of Technology. Today I am here to share with you a very exciting news. Dr. Gopinath, who is one of the top researchers and academicians of India, is joining us at NSTRU full-time. Dr. Gopinath is a BTech Computer Science from IIT Madras. He did his Masters from University of Wisconsin Medicine and then went on to do his PhD from Stanford University. He returned back to India and joined as a professor at IISc Bangalore, where he served for 30 years. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir, let's start from the very beginning. I would like to know what was your student life like and how did you gravitate towards technology?
Okay, it's an interesting question you're asking me because if you think back about what it was like in the 1970s, it was not so much technologically, suffused, you might call it, okay? Because just imagine the difference then and now. Now, the minute you do anything, you always reach out for your cell phone.
Absolutely.
Right? In those days, there was no cell phone, no internet, and the only thing that you had access to was books. So I think it's a big difference in the way we used to do things in those days. I remember that the thing that we prized most was access to a book. And books were very expensive.
So that time there was no personal computer also?
Nothing was there. I'm talking about I joined IIT Madras as a student in 1972. Okay, so all that you could get hold of was a, writing instruments like a pen, and the most expensive gadget you had was a slide rule. I don't know how many people have heard of a slide rule. It's basically a way of doing multiplication and division and certain operational exponentiation, those kind of things. No addition, subtraction. You can only do multiplication, subtraction, those kind of things. And that is the highest level of technical gadgetry you could find with a student often.
Wow.
Later, when I was exiting IIT Madras, we were exposed to mechanical calculators. And mechanical calculators, there will be some, it's a geared stuff. You have to keep inputting the numbers and you rotate it and you do addition, subtraction, those kind of things. Okay. So you can see that compared to the current, I think we are technically extremely rich right now compared to what it was that time.
Very fortunate.
So, but at the same time, in those days, you paid attention to everything. You read a book, you read it very carefully because you're not distracted by multiple things. I think now the issue is that we tend to have too many things on our plate. Sometimes we're not able to pay proper attention to things. That I think is probably probably the high level difference. I think you can see that when I joined IIT Madras, interestingly, it is 3 years after the big technical extravaganza, you might call it, the landing of human beings on the moon, right? That if you think about the technical capacity of that particular thing, there's hardly any digital, let us say, technology involved in that. There was some, but it was very small, okay? And surprisingly, they were able to, mostly analog systems were used, and surprisingly, they were able to make it happen. Yes. I think back upon it, it is just staggering what this particular effort was. Given that we have so much technical capacity now, think about how little it was, even such little amount of stuff, through careful engineering, what I would call frugal engineering, these people are able to land people on the moon. And now you cannot even imagine because the risk involved is so high. Yeah. So you can see this big difference in technological developments from that time and now. Okay. So this big difference, it's not a minor one. Okay. And for example, to give another simple illustration, Right now, I can track a taxi after ordering it. I can see it in real time, almost real time. Those days, it's just impossible to even think of such things.
Yes.
So it has happened, this kind of digitization or computerization has occurred at many, many levels. And so we take many things for granted. In the 1970s, it was much more difficult.
Got it.
So you had to be very prepared to do something. Okay? So it was slow, but you could, one argument, one kind of, you paid attention to what you were doing very closely. Okay? That possibly is the difference.
Very good. So what made you choose computer science back then?
It turns out that the IIT education at the time when I was very good. What I mean by that is, even what might consider as not that very interesting stuff, it was taught by extremely competent people. A good example is they had a course on instrumentation. What it means is you look at things like ammeters, voltmeters, and the physical principles behind it. And I was just amazed how intricate this whole thing was. Okay? And so I really just enjoyed studying some of these things because our instructors had some knack of helping us understand the intricacies of these kind of systems. But one reason why I moved from electrical systems to computer systems was that I took a project with Professor Mahabala, who was my guide at that time. Okay?
This was in IIT Madras.
IIT Madras. And he gave me a thesis written by a third-year student at MIT. Okay? And he gave me the thing saying that somebody has done a graphics controller at MIT in US. And he said, take a look at it and see what we can do here. I looked at the thesis and I was very impressed because I finally understood the concept of microprogramming by studying it. Okay? I carefully looked, because he actually gave the code. This third-year student at MIT, he has given a complete code of how exactly the graphics controller worked, etc. And then I understood what pipelining was. I sort of got a real sense of what it means to architect a computer. Okay? And so I'm not saying that I understood everything to do it myself, but I understood at a high level what this thing about programming is, what is microprogramming, those kind of things. I got some sense of it. And then so when I had an opportunity to study computer science, it happened because I did apply to some of the universities in the US. And luckily I got some 4 or 5 universities were gave me accepts, right? Like, for example, Rice University, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and other places. So I decided to go to University of Wisconsin-Madison.
So that brings me to, why did you choose to go to US further? What made you the decision to, do further studies instead of, let's say, joining the industry back then?
Actually, I did apply to IIT Madras for the MTech program. But the reason I joined, I suppose, is because that excitement about understanding more deeply about programming, microprogramming. Because, as I mentioned to you, the thesis which I read in the third year, because what we were planning to do was to, there's something called raster graphics, and there's also something called vector graphics.
Yes.
And as a project, we decided to explore the possibility of doing vector graphics. And so I was trying to see if there is a way in which I can microprogram a vector graphics controller. Okay? And not that I understood everything at that time, but I was thinking of looking at that aspect. And so when of course, our project, we couldn't really get it working because we were depending on certain MOSFETs. So we actually were doing it at the hardware level, and we were not able to locate them in India. And when finally we got them, it was too late to actually completely win. We got something working, but not fully. Okay? So that experience made me feel that I should learn more about design, etc. And so finally, when I went to University of Wisconsin, I learned quite a few things, including how to do a pipeline execution of a microprocessor, what's called a bit-sliced microprocessor. Okay? Those kind of things I studied there. But the most exciting thing for me was being exposed to compilers. Okay? Because Wisconsin, there was an instructor, I still remember his name, Charlie Fisher. It was truly amazing. Very short guy, 5 foot, something of that kind, but extraordinary amount of energy. Okay, and his way of teaching was very infectious, and I really enjoyed, and so that made me into what's called systems. Systems means you design operating systems, compilers, architectures, things of that kind. So I became much more interested in that. That's one of the
Very
reasons.
interesting.
Yeah.
And how was your journey of PhD at Stanford?
Okay. Actually, after doing my master's, I went to industry. I was at AMD. And AMD at that time, I had a responsibility as a microprocessor engineer. That is, we were trying to design something called a successor to Z8000, and then the next generation Z80000. I was one of the principal engineers for that. And then as I was designing it, I really realized that nearby was a well-known university called Stanford University. I thought I will get much more out of it by learning, because at that time VLSI was very big. So I thought that if you wanted to design new architectures, you really had to understand VLSI architectures. Okay? So I thought I will study VLSI architectures, and I did get an opportunity. I actually worked with Professor John Hennessey, who started a company called MIPS Computer Systems, and later on he became the chair of Alphabet, etc. So he designed a MIPS systems at Stanford University, and I was responsible for a small part of it, because there is something called a barrel shifter, which I did. Not that I understood everything there also, because I think these are all very complicated things. So I learned part of that small thing there, and then, but I have a habit of moving from one area to another area. So I turned out I did some architecture kind of stuff. You remember I did in the beginning bit slice processors at University of Wisconsin, but I was excited by a compiler person there. Then I went to Stanford University. I did. I was working in microcoding, etc. at AMD. Then I did some hardware stuff at Stanford, and then at Stanford again I started working with Hennessey, who is a compiler person again. So you can see I've been back and forth here and there, but I think I got some perspectives how to think about these systems. Yeah. And so I've been always calling myself a systems person. Systems person means a person who constructs systems, and it could be operating systems, it could be architectures, it could be compilers. And it turned out that I studied architecture and compilers in the US. When I went to IISc, I decided for variety of reasons I moved into operating systems. So my work at IISc mostly is all about operating systems.
Yeah. Yeah. Would it be fair to say, those were the golden times of computer science?
I think that they were the golden times for systems people, I would say. Basically because the systems were required to make things happen. Basically, pre-70s, the computing was so, let us say, in terms of power, so limited that you could hardly think of doing anything substantial. The 1970s, 80s, 90s, I think the systems people were able to make you imagine things. For example, the fact that I could use a mouse to point to some screen. Before 1970s, it was difficult to do. Okay, there was some pioneering research done by various people to make that happen. But I think the important thing is the ability to be able to do a mouse, right, was something which was not feasible. And it was done in experimental systems. For example, Xerox came up with a mouse system in 1980, for example. And I was using that for I mentioned VLSI, I designed a barrel shifter, for example. I used a mouse-based system at that time. But they were so expensive. And the genius of Steve Jobs is basically to make sure that the cost of these mouse things was at least a factor of about, anywhere from 1/6 to 1/10. Okay? That's the reason why you notice that the original PC did not come with a mouse. Okay? Only when the Apple guys introduced the mouse became a standard fixture in the PC area about 5 or 6 years later. Okay? Till that time it was not, because these things are all expensive in those days, because the computational power required was not sufficient to do all these things that easily. Okay. So I was not very much, let us say, connected with all these developments, but I had a good insight into some of what was happening. I give an example. My advisor, Hennessey, as I mentioned to you, one day in a meeting he mentioned that the genius of Steve Jobs was precisely what I mentioned just now, that it was reducing the price of the mouse to $15 or $20. Okay, I didn't understand what he meant by that, but you think about the let us say the way actually industry works. Okay, suppose your mouse costs $400. Okay, and that is the cost of a mouse that was Sun Microsystems. Okay, approximately. Okay, and normally there is a when you price it at what's called bill of materials of $400, that means that to make any profit, right? It has to be at least 3 times, 4 times, okay, because you have to talk about research and development costs and all those things, right? So that means that you're talking about a $1,200, something like that, okay, most, and that is a huge amount of money for when you're thinking of developing, let us say, a personal computer for $1,500. Okay, it's almost impossible. Okay, so the real trick is to find out, to reduce the cost to $15, multiply the factor of 3, fine, okay, it is $50. Now, if it is selling for $1,000, you can think of putting a $50 mouse, okay, effectively, okay, but not something which is $300 or $400. Okay, so there is a cost aspect to all these things, and I tell my students humorously, right, that a Ganapati rides on a mouse, right? The mouse has to be small enough, okay? Then only, of course, for us it's strange, right? How can a Ganapati ride on a mouse? But actually the mouse has to be small enough, then only the cost calculus works out, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, okay? So, I think these are some of the things that the systems people figured out, and I think post 2000, computation became sufficiently cheap. Okay, that's why AI started about, let us say, mid 2000s, 2005, 2010. Okay, because cost was becoming low and the computational power required to do AI, for example, for vision, for natural language processing, all those things started to become possible. But all this happened only because the systems people, they did part of the job that was required to be done. Okay? Good example is NVIDIA, right? You'll see that he was doing graphics in the beginning. And by 2006, 2008, people realized that the same graphics, that parallel kind of computation that happens in a graphics thing, cannot be used for parallel computation in AI sense. Yes. Okay. And that started becoming possible about 2006, 2008. By 2010, people figured out that I can start doing some AI, okay, reasonable AI, what is called deep learning kind of stuff. Okay, that started doing. And 2012 was the first example where something really interesting happened. The famous vision experiments that happened, right, in 2012, and from then there's been a flood after that. Okay. So you can say that without the systems base, you couldn't have done, you couldn't imagine what came later. Okay. And so I was, when I was a student, I was watching all these things. Okay. Of course, even that time there was excitement in AI, and you might be surprised to know I actually taught a course on AI also in 1982. Okay. For a UC Berkeley extension course, okay, but that was mostly symbolic AI, okay? And the excitement of the current AI is not symbolic AI; it's more about deep learning kind of AI, which is not so much symbolic based; it is more statistical based, okay. And for doing the statistics on a large scale, you need a lot of computation, and that computation ability came through the architectural innovations that happened, how to control the power, how to do VLS on a large scale, how to, there are a lot of other things that came into picture, and that was first tried in graphics. And even, you might find it even more surprising, my first advisor at Stanford was the person who did silicon graphics. Okay? Oh, wow. Okay, so later I moved to Hennessey. Okay, so,
and I love the fact how you casually mentioned it. There was a nearby university, Stanford, so I decided to PhD.
Because I was living in Palo Alto at that time, so it was nearby.
You mentioned some of the biggest names of industry and research that time. I'm pretty sure many of them have gone on to become some of the biggest movers and shakers of United States as well. How was your experience working with them?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that I happened to have met some of the big names in computer science. A good example is Professor Knuth, for example. Professor John McCarthy, the person who coined the term artificial intelligence. And Jim Clark, who was who did a geometry engine, okay? The first graphics computers, for example, SGIs, Silicon Graphics, for example. He was the first person to figure out how to do that graphics pipeline well. That basically is about geometric processing, which finally resulted in graphics processors, which finally resulted in this current AI situation. Okay? That also silicon graphics. Okay? So I also worked with Hennessey, who founded the MIPS Computer Systems, as we discussed before, and later he became the president of Stanford University, and later he was the chairman of the Alphabet, which runs Google and other. So I do. As my luck,
and if I am correct, then Dr. James Clark is also the founder of Netscape, which was world's most popular browser at that time.
Actually, Netscape was founded by Jim Clark and Mark Anderson. Okay? Mark Anderson became a later VC of in Silicon Valley. Okay. So it's quite interesting that by sheer luck, I seem to have met many of these big names. I think that the interesting thing is that I'll give you some anecdotes about Hennessey, who was my advisor. Okay, I remember that I'd done some work, and I thought that I had completed my PhD. So I went and met him at let's say an event. I told him that I'm mostly done. I'm going to write it up. He just said, "Okay, write it up, and then I'll take a look." But I could not resist telling him that there was one unsolved problem, okay, which nobody had solved. Okay, and he immediately said, "You solve it. If you solve it only, you will get a PhD."
Oh, wow.
Okay. Now I realize I foolishly opened my mouth. Okay, I shouldn't have opened my mouth, and I should have just let it go. And then, but since he mentioned it, I decided to look at the problem more closely. I knew that was not solved. Like I knew that I had studied all that work that happened before. Some professor at Yale University had done some work, and I felt that he had not solved it completely. So I decided to look into it, and I'm happy that I opened my mouth, because Hennessey made me sure that I solved that problem. And if you ask me right now, what is my contribution, I'd say that that's the only contribution I have, serious contribution. Okay, and that's an example of what I would call as goal setting. What I mean by goal setting is that if you're a good advisor, you have to set the right goals for your students. Okay, and that way I think Hennessey was an extremely good goal setter. Okay, so and that's how his phenomenal success also. He has many great students, and I think, as I mentioned to you, he became the president of Stanford University. He has also founded multiple companies. Okay, and as I mentioned, he was a chairman of the Alphabet, etc. So I think that's the thing about top people like Hennessey, etc. They're able to sense what the potential in a particular student or in a system or in an organization. They're able to set the right goals, and magically it happens. Of course, people who don't have that capacity cannot succeed in the same way like these people do. Okay.
Some of the top professors are actually able to mold their students and take them to new heights, which even the student could not have imagined. So the role of a mentor and professor in a student's life is just very deep, I would say.
Yeah. I think basically there was a lot of graduate students who were very good. And so one of the things about being in a top place, especially at Stanford kind of places, is that you learn with other students. Okay, basically you don't learn directly from the advisor per se. There's a famous quote in India also, right? Basically they say 1/4 you learn from the guru, 1/4 you learn from your students, 1/4 by your own effort, and 1/4 by time. Okay, by kala kramena, I said it's called. Okay, by time. Okay, so you don't learn anything immediately because you talk to a guru or something like that. But I think important thing is that a guru actually has a lot of good students around. Okay, so you start learning with students. Okay, so you keep interacting with them, and your let us say your ability to think about your own problems in a different way sometimes happens. Okay, so that is what I think is important also. Okay, so.
Sir, how did the return to India happen? What went behind that decision?
Okay, I think one thing about me has been that I was always interested in certain Indian forms of thinking. Okay, a good example is when I was a student at high school, we were introduced to notion of chandas. Okay, in Telugu language, because Telugu is chandas,
which is used in poetry and literature.
Exactly. And I found it really magical. Okay, and I used to have discussions with my elder sister on given any poem, try to figure out what its chandas was. Okay, and of course the study of chandas has been very deeply researched in India, and actually there are a lot of computational aspects to these chandas. Okay, basically you can think of chandas as a way of abstraction, so that you have a abstracted notion of the various smaller units, and if you make any mistakes, for example, from the abstraction you can find out if you made a mistake or not. Okay, basically in some sense there is some kind of error correcting circuitry in the chandas. Okay, something like that you can call it. Okay, and so I was intrigued by, for example, chandas is one, and also Indian classical music is something very deeply part of me in a sense. Not that I'm good at the thing, but listening to good classical music, you feel deeply about it. Yeah. Okay? And so you might say that things like these were constant companions. So one wants to understand where is all this depth of understanding in either chandas or music, and because they're so different from alternate models, for example, in the Western world, etc. Okay, and so I think that these are some of the things that were with me for most of my young days. And other thing also is because I think when you look at all the excitement in Silicon Valley, etc., you will see that, as I mentioned, I did work, I was interacting with some of the top, but you felt that there is something you need of that kind also in countries like India, because there is something interesting that happened to me, because I went to IIT, I discovered myself there. Okay, and one can argue that this is one way of my runa, right? Basically my debt to, because before I went to IIT Madras, I hardly knew who I was in some sense. I went to IIT Madras and I think I sort of became somebody. Okay, I became a person of some kind. Okay, and that was a fairly deep transformation that happened to me at IIT Madras, and so you might say I became a full an Indian at heart in some sense. Okay, being at IIT Madras. Okay, so even though I was in US for 13 years or so, that Indianness never left me. Okay, that as mentioned, various influences including chandas and music, and that IIT Madras experience, etc. Okay, so one senses that one could do something for the country also in some different way. Okay, and so I think there are other reasons also, political reasons also. I felt that India as a country has a lot to offer the world, because it has a different way of thinking about things, I think. Okay, so I felt that that's good one. So I felt I could come back to India and do something interesting here. And one argument also for it is that you are 1 in 10,000 if you are in the US. I'm talking about computer science at PhD level. In India, it will be 1 in 200 or something like that. Okay? So there's a chance of you are doing more. Okay, and actually it happened to some extent that way, because when I came back, as I mentioned, I was excited about compilers, but for whatever reasons, I decided to do something in operating systems, and I had such good students at IISc that they did some phenomenally interesting and difficult job. There's something called developing a file system. Okay, and we did it with very minimal support, minimal, let's say, infrastructure. And a company called Veritas in Pune, they heard about the kind of capacity we had in our students to do some interesting work. Okay, and they decided, believe it or not, to start a company in Pune based on the fact that IIS students can do things of this kind. Okay, so you can see that most of storage industry is concentrated in, even today, in Pune. Okay, of course there is later EMC etc. came to Bangalore, but the initial let us say concentration of work that happened in storage systems, file systems, and all that kind of stuff, that happened in Pune. Okay, precisely because that students from my laboratory, for example, they were in Veritas, and Veritas became very big, so as much as 3,000 people once at point, and then they in turn seeded other companies, and of course there are other companies like Persistent at database companies,
in
etc.
Pune.
Okay, Pune. But the important thing is you added a component of what I would call deep kernel work. Basically, our students were working in the Linux kernel and Solaris kernel, and since they were able to get certain things done, at technically difficult things done, so there was already a market for companies like Veritas and EMC and NetApp, etc., to tap into the talent that students from my lab and other labs could, graduated from. And so, in a sense, I'm happy that my being in IISc, of course, by being in IISc, I think it seeded some of this work. Right now, I'm not doing much work in storage systems. I moved on to some other areas, but I think that I can say with some happiness that my initial work when I moved from compilers to operating systems, somehow by circumstances, by happy circumstances like working with Veritas and other kind of, it put, let us say, some systems work on a solid footing.
Yeah, I would say it created great impact. And back then, taking that decision of not pursuing a career in Silicon Valley, which was very hot back then.
Even now it is hot.
Even today it's hot. But still, if I look at it, for any Indian today, it's a much easier decision to stay back in India, because back then there was nothing in India. So coming back that time and deciding to inspire students in India, that's a phenomenal decision that you took, and it's a very courageous one. So
I think, I think there are multiple reasons I mentioned to you. I think it was not a one particular single reason. I think one of the things also was that to see if you could make some reasonable impact, and that I think is what finally worked out. Okay.
Yeah. Amazing. So, are you still friends with your mates from IIT Madras?
Not that much.
I was coming from where, because most of my friends today are only from college. So, no friends I made after college. So, I was thinking, back then, friendships would have been very thick.
Okay. No, I think what I would say is, as I mentioned to you, the person who taught me table tennis, the person who taught me something about physics, the guy whom I respect is one of the most amazing fellows in my opinion.
Sir, what motivates you to be a professor today?
Beautiful question. I think what motivates me is that it sort of ties in with who I am as a person in this country, for example, and what it means to be a citizen of the world. Okay, you might find it very peculiar that I'm saying this. Okay, what I mean by that is, being part of this country, there has been a tradition of thinking in India, and to me it is highly computational. Okay, and that's why I've edited a book called Computational Thinking in India. And so, in a sense, being a professor gives me that ability to relate myself to the larger world, myself as a person, my the country at large, our country, and also the world. Okay? Basically, because our people have thought deeply about many of the issues, philosophical questions, computational thinking, and so I try to understand what is it that motivated them. Okay, to pose such questions. As I mentioned to you, this Chandas, Pingala in about 2000 years back, he has what is called a combinatorics of poetry construction. Okay. That means that, for example, he would pose questions like this, right? Suppose I have some unit of time, and you have subdivisions, right? And the subdivisions can be parts of what, for example, India called Tala, right? Question is, how many Talas are possible? Okay, and they were posing this kind of questions. Okay? It's a beautiful that they were thinking about this kind of things, and these are the parts of what is called combinatorics nowadays. People talk about combinatorics, and it is an important part of computer science. Okay? So, as an academic, as a faculty member, you have the luxury of connecting the past with the future and the present, and those kind of things you can do with, I think, in any other profession it's not so easy. Okay, other people also do it And they're all great people. So they are able to connect lots of different. But I think we get a slightly easier time. I think we have an easier time. So, for example, there are great engineers. For example, the person Sridharan who did the metro in Delhi.
Yeah.
They're also amazing when it comes to how to conceptualize such difficult things. You have to work with government, you have to work with society, you have to work with your own staff and do such things which are game changing. To be able to put a metro in a city like Delhi is not trivial. These are amazing people. They have done the harder job. We have a slightly easier time, because we don't have to do such harder things. So being a professor gives you that flexibility and ability to think large scale without the hard work that's needed by people like Siddharth, for example.
Got it. So I'm confident that your presence at Newton School of Technology is going to inspire thousands of students and even faculty members. And it's going to set in a very strong culture of research. But I want to hear in your words what makes you excited about Newton School of Technology.
I think if you look at the way the technology is progressing, there are many directions in technology. For example, of course, artificial intelligence is one, quantum computing is another. So many areas are there. Now, to be able to sustain work in all these areas, I think it is important that some private initiatives also are able to contribute to this, because that gives some more depth to the educational enterprise. Basically, the country requires a very large educated workforce, and institutions, what we have in the universities, etc., that have been there for some time in the last, they have a particular space in the educational framework. But we also need newer institutes which are probably more nimble, who can handle this immediacy that's required in making sure that graduates of these institutes are able to work well in industry. So I think that both research components and delivery components both have to be part of the game, and I think that having private initiatives will help quite a lot. That's why we'll see a lot of private universities now coming out quite a bit, and I think that NST is another excellent example where you take competence in developing full stack solutions, for example. That could be something quite important, and therefore if you are able to train people, I think long term it will help in making sure that there is depth in the system.
Interesting. What would be a message you would want to give to students who want to make a career in tech?
Okay, I think if I look back upon my own so many years of being in this area, right? What I find interesting is that there's something technical stuff actually gives you some interesting insights into some higher level thinking needed to structure your understanding of the world around you. And so I think that it's back and forth. So the more technically grounded you are, you better understand, I think, society around you, I believe, and vice versa. The more you understand society, you start seeing certain interesting ways to think about it in a technical sense also. So I think that if you ask me, if you put me in either in this country or US or wherever, I'll find that the same curiosity can drive wherever you are. So that's why I don't find let's say problematic that I am here or there. It doesn't matter, because I think there is that technical / societal understanding. When they come together, wherever you are, you find it interesting. So from that point of view, I would advise students to study something in reasonable depth, so that you'll see the beauty of whatever system you are part of. So you might find it problematic, the system doesn't do what you want to do, whatever. But you will see that there is something interesting about it, and you will find it intellectually challenging to figure out how to do something interesting there. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to put quote to it, I would say only in the depth of the ocean you'll find a lot of gold.
Both
So that is
breadth
very
also is required sometimes, because if, for example, you look at computation as a good example, right? See, statistics was not part of computer science for a long time. Okay, it was seen as something adjunct. Okay, for example, when I studied computer science at Wisconsin, I never took a course on statistics. Okay, just nearby was is a statistics department, but I never took any course there.
Yeah.
Okay, but nowadays there is nothing can do in a computer science without taking some basic course on it, because whether it is theory of computing, a lot of statistical probabilistic approaches are there. Okay, of course AI. So what I'm trying to say is that there is some depth requirement, and so it's very difficult. That's one of the big challenges of higher education, including education at NST, is how to provide that breadth at the same time the depth. Okay, it's not a trivial thing. And when I was at Plaksha University also, and basically when you want to add AI, you have to take out something. The question is what to take out, what to add in. That becomes a very tricky business.
True.
And so it's there's a lot of multiple approaches are possible. Different people will try different combinations. And I think that one of the things that is interesting to me at this point is to figure out exactly what is that mix that has to be done, so that students are reasonably well qualified to understand various components of the current technical, let's say, developments, and not feel left behind. Okay.
Very interesting. Thank you, sir, so much for the time, and we are very excited to have you.
Thank you so much. It was really nice talking to you. Thanks.